you might say, well, why would you blame him? He's the mayor. Because it was his policy. He hired the police commissioner. Anybody that was around will tell you that he was running the police department more so than any police commissioner. He had like 4 or 3 or I don't remember how many, a whole lot.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I am Sunil Dasgupta. This July, President Biden nominated former Maryland governor and former Baltimore mayor Martin O'Malley to lead the Social Security Administration, whose headquarters are in Baltimore. In response, Maryland State Senator Jill Carter from Baltimore tweeted that she now has zero incentive to support the president. She is a Democrat. She said she had not overcome the PTSD from political torture. PTSD? Political torture? I asked her what she meant, only to find raw emotions and unhealed trauma about one of the worst periods of excessive and repressive policing, not just in Baltimore, but arguably anywhere in the country. The stuff the TV show The Wire was made of. 750,000 arrests over 7 years. About a third released without charges, possibly illegal arrests without probable cause. The making of political trauma in Baltimore is not a story we want to forget. The storyboard for this interview was written by Daniel Galileo, who has now joined the show as an assistant producer. Daniel is a Rockville resident veteran of Montgomery County student politics and now a UMBC political science student. This episode, we are back with the 5th student review of contested books in the MCPS curriculum. This week's book is Born Ready, the true story of a boy named Penelope by Jody Patterson and Charnel Pinckney Barlow. I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society moving precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Washington, D.C.'s post-punk rock band Gray Swift. Mike Mangiaracina on guitar and vocals, Fabrizio Cariani on guitar and backing vocals, Evan Hurd on bass, and Chris Blackburn on drums. You can find Gray Swift on their Bandcamp page, link in the show notes. In the news this week, when Amazon decided to locate its HQ2, its second headquarters in Arlington County in Virginia, one of the provisions of the deal was that the county, Arlington County, would pay one of the largest companies on earth $23 million in additional incentives, calculated to be 15% of the increase in hotel tax revenues in the area stemming from Amazon's investments. A kind of give back to the company for generating business for Arlington hotels. But hotel tax has not recovered since the pandemic, and this is the 4th year in a row that Arlington County has escaped paying out this incentive to Amazon. Amazon has broken ground on 2 new office towers and moved new employees to HQ2, but it has also indefinitely shelved plans for another set of buildings, and the company has now vacated more than 500,000 square feet of office space from nearby National Landing. The effect of the pandemic is expected to ease. Amazon recently asked its employees to end work from home, which is expected to raise both office space use and hotel room occupancy. Arlington County projects that next year it will have to make a small incentive payment to Amazon in the expectation that hotel tax revenue will finally pass the 2018 threshold when the agreement was made. Amazon is also due $750 million from the state of Virginia in incentives, but has pushed back its claim for these monies, citing pandemic conditions. While local leaders continue to praise Amazon's contributions to the local economy, the question of whether economic development incentives are actually helpful or another form of corporate welfare remains unsettled. Just to the south, planners in the city of Alexandria have proposed doing away with exclusive single-family zoning altogether in an effort to encourage more housing supply. The average single-family home in the city costs close to $1 million. Depending on what city lawmakers allow, homeowners could build up to 4 units on a lot that is now reserved for single-family home. The change does not mean that those who own single-family homes will have to turn their homes into fourplexes, but rather that there will be economic incentives for them to do so, and legal sanction. Alexandria is the second municipality in the Washington, D.C. region to propose citywide end to single-family zoning. Arlington County passed similar zoning law earlier this year, but capped the number of multifamily units that could be built. Denizens Brewing Company, the OG craft brewery in Montgomery County, is moving out. Their 10-year lease on their location in downtown Silver Spring came up for renewal, and it seems they have decided not to renew the lease at the cost the landlords wanted. Julie Verratti, one of the 3 owners of Denizens, was on I Hate Politics about a year ago, and we discussed this possibility. Generally, her view was that running a small business in Montgomery County was hard, and it would have helped if the government could remove even the small indignities of excessive paperwork and such. If all costs, including rents, were high, then the economics were going to be hard to work out. Denizens was one of the first breweries in the county and led the alcohol liberalization regime that is now widespread. Recently, the Rockville Brewery, True Respite, closed as well, and before that, Astrolab, also in Silver Spring. Denizens, though, will continue at their presumably cheaper location in Riverdale Park in Prince George's County. 2 new breweries have opened in the county, Baby Cat in Kensington and Third Hill in Silver Spring. If you have thoughts on the economics of breweries, please reach out at producer@ihppod.org or on social media at IHPpod. With the heat index above 100 degrees now, the temperatures on artificial turf fields across the county could be as high as 140, raising yet again the wisdom of putting in plastic where natural grass should grow. The incentive for this choice comes from public finance accounting practice and its consequences. The cost of plastic fields go into the capital budget, part of which is defrayed by the state. Natural grass fields, however, need a bigger maintenance budget, which schools and counties must pay for themselves. Can these super high temperatures move the argument? We'll see. As you know, we've been doing student book reviews of contested books on the show for several weeks. This week, we have a new book. Hi, Tula.
Hi.
What book are you reviewing today?
Today we're reviewing Born Ready, the true story of a boy named Penelope. It's a picture book by Jodi Patterson and Charnel Pinckney Barlow.
Who are the main characters of the book?
The main characters in the book are Penelope, a boy who loves skating, karate, and a mohawk haircut. Penelope's mom, a kind, caring person who Penelope has a very strong bond with. Penelope's brother, who's kind of a know-it-all from Penelope's point of view, and his sister, very bossy.
How does the story start?
We meet Penelope, whose family is busy all the time. They don't realize the message that he's trying to convey, that he's actually a boy. To the reader, he introduces himself and his family.
So what happens next?
This drives Penelope to the point where he makes trouble to draw attention to himself, believing that there is no other way for people to see him as his true self. Penelope's mom finally asks him what's going on, and Penelope explains. She says that if he feels like a boy, that's okay. Penelope reiterates that he doesn't feel like a boy, but that he is a boy.
How does the story end then?
Penelope's mom understands and even helps him tell his family. They are all accepting, and the story ends on a happy note.
It's kind of rare. What is your impression of the book?
I enjoyed this book. It was a great, real-life example of how trans youth should be treated. The illustrations were good, and the plot of the story was pretty good as well. However, I did notice a similar situation here as to Love, Violet. While it seems completely normal for a trans boy to reject stereotypically feminine clothing, Penelope says that he likes skateboarding and baggy blue jeans. He is 5 years old in the book. I don't think a 5-year-old would wear baggy blue jeans and skateboard, and I wonder if this actually happened, seeing as though it's a true story, or if it was added in fictionally. Otherwise, this was a pretty good book. Like I said in the last review, there are only about 3 books on gender identity out of 13 LGBTQ recommended books. That's pretty crazy.
Why is it crazy?
Because of all of them, it's a lot about sexual orientation, and right now, that's not as big of a problem as how trans people are being treated. So I think there should be definitely more books on gender identity.
Thank you, Tula.
Of course.
If you know of other contested books in MCPS or in another school district or public library, and you want them reviewed, or know students who might be willing to review books on air, please reach out at producer@ihppod.org. I'll be back with Maryland State Senator from Baltimore, Jill Carter. You're listening to I Hate Politics. I am Sunil Dasgupta. Jill Carter, welcome to I Hate Politics.
I'm so happy to be here.
You wrote a tweet that was striking for me. And I'm going to read that tweet out before we get your thoughts on it. And you said, I've lived long enough to not hold grudges when people wrong me, but I haven't overcome the PTSD from political torture. I've been indifferent about President Biden until yesterday. Now I have zero incentive to support him. You may say there's no alternative. I say there is. Now, when I read this tweet, I thought it was a subtweet about President Biden appointing Martin O'Malley to the Social Security Administration to be the director. What were you thinking?
So actually, without knowing you, or possibly without your knowing the whole history here, I'm surprised that you picked up on the fact that I might have been making reference to the nomination of Martin O'Malley. That's exactly what I meant, but I didn't want to get into an argument or a debate online, so I didn't want to, be that explicit about it. But people who know me would know that that's what I meant. Martin O'Malley was mayor of Baltimore and governor of Maryland. And when he was mayor of Baltimore, his policies on policing resulted in the arrest of 750,000 people. That is more than the population of the city of Baltimore. And certainly if you look at people eligible for arrest, meaning people old enough to even be arrested, not small children, that number is astounding. It's been well documented now from the Department of Justice investigation of Baltimore and the current consent decree that going back through those O'Malley years, Baltimore police routinely violated the Constitution, made arrests without probable cause, and made both unlawful arrest, illegal arrest, as well as unnecessary arrest. What my tweet was about was that, frankly, the wrongs that Martin O'Malley enacted on Baltimore Black people have never been redressed. Even to this day, to my knowledge, he refuses to admit and acknowledge the negative impact he had on this city. We are still suffering from the results of those policies, from lifting people up out of their families, communities, jobs, and homes. And now, their lives were disrupted, and it helped to destabilize so many families and communities, even still having the effects today. He's never apologized to that, never acknowledged it. Very much like Bill Clinton and the crime bill of 1994. Well, the Black community said they wanted tough on crime, so I was just doing what they said. But here's the issue. Yeah, maybe that's what you believed, and we don't hold it against you that you believed it. But now that you've seen such the negative repercussions of it, can you not say at a certain point you need to change the policies and go a different direction? The real story and truth has never really been fleshed out.
Okay, so I think time to do that now.
Well, let me back a little bit back past that. I was born and raised in Baltimore City. My father was a very committed civil rights activist and leader who passed away when I was 7 years old. My mom had been a housewife, but when my dad abruptly died, my mother was able to go to work and become a school teacher.
What year was that?
1971.
Okay.
So she became a school teacher, and until her retirement, she was an early childhood education teacher. Having been born into the belly of the civil rights struggle in Baltimore, having had all of my early life be just inundated with the struggle for freedom, the beauty of Black people, the quest for Black power. As a little girl, because it was again the 60s when I was born, we would walk around, and when we would greet each other on the street, Black people, we would say, peace, brother, peace, peace, sister, peace, peace, baby, peace. So that's my beginnings. And then my father abruptly dies, and then I go about the business of growing up in a neighborhood called Ashburton, which is considered a Black middle-class neighborhood. I go to Loyola College, I go to UB Law School, and I become a lawyer. And I am working for my judge, who back then, there were huge criminal dockets every day. And I am astounded. This is before O'Malley. I'm just coming out of law school. I'm astounded by the sheer volume of Black people, mainly males, cuffed to each other like a long chain all across the court, all across the front row of the court.
Like a chain gang.
Exactly. The visual of it alone was astounding. And so even that, I mean, I see it and it's really horrifying and scary, but even that, I don't think that gave me a sense of purpose necessarily. It became clear to me through various people that I interacted with, clients, and even some friends and acquaintances, that there was a trend in Baltimore shortly after I was elected in the early 2000s of people being arrested en masse with no probable cause. So unjustified arrest, what I like to term illegal arrest. And when I first became aware of the amount that it was happening, which was a whole lot, I was surprised, because at first when people would say to me like, oh, I got arrested, and I'm like, what were your charges? And they were like, nothing. I'm like, don't give me that. What, let me see the paperwork. What are the charges? And they're like, no, I don't have any charges. I'm like, what? And so this kept happening. And so I went to some of my colleagues. I was a new delegate. I went to some of my colleagues in the Baltimore delegation and discussed this issue being a problem. I went to the Martin O'Malley administration and discussed this being a problem. And no one, not the O'Malley administration, not any of my colleagues, seemed to agree that it was problematic. I went to some of the media outlets to give the sheer numbers of people that were being arrested and released without charges, which was tens of thousands. Okay, it was averaging at that time about 11,000 a month. Out of every, say, 30,000 arrests that were being made, 11,000 were released without charges. That's a huge number.
750,000 over 7 years, right? Or no?
But what? Yeah, but that's over 100,000.
100,000 a year. And then you said also that 30,000 a month arrests. And
There were some months during the height of it where there might be 30,000 arrests. Yes. I think there was a period of 2 years, maybe in the middle, when it was elevated.
Which years were the worst?
I was a new delegate, so it must have been 2002 to 2004 or 5.
Why were those years so bad?
Martin O'Malley. And so you might say, well, why would you blame him? He's the mayor. Because it was his policy. He hired the police commissioner. Anybody that was around will tell you that he was running the police department more so than any police commissioner. You know, he had like 4 or 3, or I don't remember how many, a whole lot. I'm thinking he had 4 or 5 or 6 police commissioners over his tenure. And as a delegate, I become aware of these numbers of people getting arrested without probable cause. And I'm astounded. And so my initial thought is, oh, well, we just need to let O'Malley know that this is how his policy is playing out, and he'll change the policy. Because I didn't think he's like a evil, bad, racist human being or anything. I think he thinks he's doing something good to stop crime or cut crime. But if he knew the impact it's having, he'd probably change it. But what was discovered is that he was not amenable to changing the policy, even knowing how the impact it was having.
So how did you reach out to him?
How did I reach out to him? I tried to talk to him. I was a delegate. He wouldn't talk to me. In fact, even when I got the NAACP and some other stakeholders to schedule a meeting with him at City Hall and the then police commissioner, when I went to walk into the City Hall with the NAACP and others, he had the security block me and say that I wasn't allowed to come into City Hall.
So it was personally against you. Then it wasn't like this is a disagreement over public policy. It was personally against you.
He took it personally. For me, it was about the policy. For him, it was personal. I think that, he couldn't tolerate the idea of me, low level, little lowly freshman delegate me, just a lowly nothing Black woman to him, having the audacity to challenge him. So he thought, I'll just, relegate her I'll marginalize her, I'll silence her, I'll dismiss her, and she'll go away. But what happened was the leaders of the NAACP, Marvin Doc Cheatham, who was the president, he refused to meet with O'Malley without me. Why? Because I had been the one who had orchestrated the entire thing. Without me, he wouldn't have even known about the issue.
Without you, the head of NAACP Baltimore would not have known that there were so many illegal arrests.
Everybody kind of sensed something was wrong, but it wasn't until I brought the issue to the forefront and brought it to the NAACP, as well as other people in the community, and tried to bring it to the media, which didn't want to hear it, and tried to bring it to my colleagues in the House delegation that didn't want to hear it, ignored it, tried to bring it to a number of people, didn't want to hear it. Didn't want to hear it, didn't care enough to do anything about it. So the bottom line is, so because of the history, Doc Cheatham was not going to allow the meeting to take place without me. So he decided they were going to walk out if O'Malley didn't allow me in. And then we all sat down at the table and we tried to work out something, but O'Malley got, I don't know what he got. He left in the middle of the meeting and like, my hands are up and I'm not going to hear any more of this. So nothing got accomplished in that meeting.
Do you think that there was trust in the Baltimore Police Department even prior to O'Malley?
Oh, it wasn't I think there's always been a contentious relationship between many Black people and communities and law enforcement, especially in Baltimore City, because we have a really bad history with, martial law back in the day in the 60s, and a former police commissioner I've heard about before my time called William Pomerleau, with he was known for, some corruption and some real racial discrimination. But so we have a whole history there. But like in my lifetime, no, I didn't grow up believing that police would just jump out of their car and just harass you for no reason. That was something I don't think most of us were used to until it grew and increased during those years. Baltimore was and is still a majority Black city, that we had a mayor who happened to be a white man who wasn't even from Baltimore. The idea that someone came into Baltimore and actually came into Baltimore from an outside and then enacted such heinous policies. Because of all of this, the mayor, who was then about to run for governor, Martin O'Malley, was the pinnacle of the Democratic Party in Maryland at that time, meaning all Democrat leaders were invested in his rise to governor. And at that time, there was talk about president ultimately. There was zero tolerance for me, for this kind of independent thinking Black woman. Much what I got is, who do you think you are? And, of course, I thought I was a Baltimorean rooted in civil rights and human rights and finding something intolerable. And it was my responsibility to try to stop it. But the establishment, who also had a lot of power, not just, within the party, in terms of like the Speaker of the House and all of the leaders of the House of Delegates and the Senate of Maryland, they also had a great deal of influence with the media. And so at that time, all media stories ignored the gravity of the issue. And my name, whenever used, began to be used in a very negative, demeaning, just a way of like ridicule and dismissiveness or actual vitriol. And so when no one would listen to me or care or seem to care, I decided to take out an ad on the radio on a Black station. And it simply, I paid for it out of my own pocket, not campaign funds. I just thought it was a really important message to get out to people, and I couldn't find any other way to get it out. And so my message on the radio was something like, that I created was something like, because everybody was telling me that it was Martin O'Malley's order, his directive to pressure police to make these arrests. The police were even saying it's O'Malley's zero tolerance quota system that is forcing us to make all of these unnecessary arrests so he can appear to be tough on crime. And so basically the ad that I submitted to WOLB was whatever it said. It was like, this number of people have been arrested in this amount of time. This many are being released without charges. This is a result of Mayor O'Malley's zero tolerance program. Please contact my office if this has happened to you, or if you have any insight on this. But also, let's please ask Martin O'Malley to stop the illegal arrest. Well, WOLB, even though I was paying for my own ad, they wouldn't allow me to put that ad on the air like that. And so it was modified to, I couldn't use the name Martin O'Malley, and I couldn't call it illegal arrest. So it became unwarranted or uncharged arrest. I'm just saying all this to say that even the media wouldn't allow me at the time to use the mayor's name in an ad I was paying for, when everybody knew that it was a result of his policy on mass arrest. For a good amount of time, everybody kind of ignored it. At that time, I was also the legal redress chair of the local Baltimore City branch of the NAACP. And so Marvin Doc Cheatham was the chair of the NAACP here at the time, and he knew this was happening. I discussed it with him, and I also had discussed it with the ACLU, and they knew that it was happening. And so they were gathering plaintiffs. And so I said to the ACLU people at the time, listen, if you're going to bring a lawsuit, I don't think you should bring it without connecting with a Black organization like the NAACP, because it's mainly Black people being affected by this injustice. And so they did. And so together, the NAACP and ACLU brought a lawsuit against the city and O'Malley for those illegal arrests, and they won that lawsuit.
If, in fact, the actual policy has moved on, and they have moved on politically, are you saying that a policy change will only happen if there is a true apology in place?
So I think apology is a first step. I think acknowledging a wrong is a first step to beginning to correct the wrong. Whether Martin O'Malley, I assume he'll go to his grave never apologizing, but that's not the issue. My point is that I can't move on in terms of thinking he's a more evolved person worthy of a great appointment when I believe he's never faced or confronted the harm that he has caused the majority of people of this city. So that's how I feel about him. But I think that also I was a casualty of his ambition and the victim of a huge amount of political gaslighting because of him being so powerful and having really control over the Democratic Party. And I'll give you an example. This is so little, such minor, it's minor petty stuff that I don't dwell in, but I'll just give you so you can understand what I mean. So it was kind of like an unwritten rule that was said to me by many of my colleagues at the time, that not in rooms that I was in, but in rooms they were in, that it was known that when my bill came to the committee, it wasn't getting a vote, right? Because it was me. And when I asked deeper questions, well, what is it exactly about me or the fact that it's my bill that's so problematic? Well, O'Malley doesn't like you. The speaker doesn't like you because, in large part, because of the pushing of Martin O'Malley. So I was treated so terribly. But in addition to that, the gaslighting and the spread of the distorted perception that was spread throughout the party to this day, Congressman Steny Hoyer, who I never met earlier in my career ever, almost hisses when he sees me, and I hear from other people, like, he says horrifically terrible things about me, but he's never in his entire life been able to stoop into a conversation with me, and we've been in proximity multiple times. And I'm not vilifying Steny Hoyer. I'm saying it's an example of how strong how deeply rooted this kind of disdain and vitriol was spread about me early in my career. And even here today and in my current career, I'm still enduring that kind of treatment and sort of in certain ways abuse, in so many ways I can't even tell you. And so what's really interesting, and I do want to get here, So I sit out for a while. People ask me to run for the Senate, but here's what's interesting. I skipped over so many things, but one of the biggest issues for me in the House of Delegates was the need for police reform. Police reform. And every year I'd come in with my harmed families, my mothers whose children were killed by police, just gut-wrenching stories that of people in real life that were hurt, and the legislature refused to touch it. But so they ignored all of these Black women and Black families and Black people that said in real life the police really are harming us. They ignored all that. But also in so doing, they made me like they gaslit me so terribly, like, you know, like my policies were insane, crazy, and, you know, just anti-police, and I'm just like a rebel. I even read in some blogs, because if you remember, blogs used to be big. I even read in some blogs like back then, like, you know, Jill Carter's just crazy. She just hates white people. She's, you know, always throwing stones, you know, just complete ridiculousness. But because it was the narrative, people believed it. But when I come back to the Senate, all of a sudden, listen to this. So, of course, then George Floyd happens, and everybody's all about, oh, we need police reform. Forget all of the data of the more than 500 Black people and other Marylanders that were killed at the hands of police that we had the data for many years. Forget all of that. All of a sudden, we're ready to do police reform, and a number of other things. But I'm just saying, like, the times have changed, and yes, the vitriol and the legislative body is newer. So no, I'm not getting it to that extent. There's still those old people around that still kind of like hiss at me and are nasty. But for the most part, I feel, and I'm not angry about it, because I think what's supposed to happen for us in life happens. In many ways, my career was completely derailed. You know, when I first came into office, I came in with no political support as a complete grassroots independent, ran a grassroots campaign. Nobody thought I would win, including me. And I came in number one in my district. And like the coalition, the co-conspirators and coalition of Democrats in office got together and decided, we got to stop this woman. Like, we can't let this type of thing happen. Because at the time I won my election in Baltimore for the House of Delegates back then in 2003, it hadn't been done. I think that someone told me that it had been about 47 years in Baltimore since a non-establishment, non-endorsed, non-hand-selected, non-ticketed candidate beat a ticket. So I had all of those things going on, you know. Then I get there and I'm speaking up to things they don't want to address. So that was my beginning to politics. That was the majority of my experience in politics.
Do you feel that now, you know, now that you're in the Senate, you have passed a police reform bill, and you are taken a little more seriously, do you feel like you have won?
I don't think I've won. I think to some extent, to anyone that's paying attention, I've been to some extent vindicated within certain circles that wanted to demonize me. And I think it's been made clear that those kind of things were incorrect. I'm confused personally about why it took George Floyd to have people sit up and take notice. I don't really understand, but it did make a difference. It did cause a shift. I went downtown in Baltimore, and for many years we had protests. We had protests, you know, around Freddie Gray and Tyrone West. The massive numbers of white people in mass protesting after George Floyd. And I remember the thing that brought tears to my eyes is white people having signs saying, "Stop killing Black people." That was the first time I'd ever seen a mass movement of white people fighting for the cause. Do I think that had influence? Yes, I do.
Do we need white people to be protesting to protect Black lives?
Well, I do believe it's necessary, especially in Maryland. Now, let me be clear. Now that we know that Maryland, the browning of America and Maryland is becoming more Black and brown, it could shift. But historically, white people have had the power. So absolutely, we've needed white people to embrace certain change.
If you believe that having white support is necessary to bring change to the lives of Black folks, right? then your politics by definition changes somewhat as a consequence. If I'm hearing you correct, is that there's a difference that happened in after the George Floyd murder from the 2003, 4, 5, at the time that Martin O'Malley was mayor of Baltimore, that in this time there were white people out there, demanding a fair policy toward Black folks. And at that time, there wasn't. And really, I'm trying to understand why this couldn't have happened before. Is it necessary? Or in going forward, as you say, Maryland is browning, would that be required? Or would you have a coalition of Black and brown people that can do this all on their own?
I think if it changes, it's at least far down the road, like at least 20 or more years down the road, that there's a change in this dynamic. I also know that leaders did polling across Maryland, and they poll to see what are the views of people, and everybody, the majority of people in the Democratic Party, white people included, said we want police accountability. I do not believe we would have done what we did if white people hadn't said we don't want police to kill Black people with impunity, because they did say that in the polling as well. I think that was highly influential. And so the time that we are moving away from that, I think that's far down the road. So that's all I have to say on that. I think that that actually brings me to my other issue, because I said it's the power and the money. I said there's two things. There's the power and the money, and the other thing, we enjoy a 2/3 majority, even more now. We've grown in power in the legislative body across Maryland in the last election cycle, but we've always had the power. I've always said that if your elected official is running around your district telling you that they're going to Annapolis to fight Republicans, you need another elected official, because they're lying to you. Yes, we had a Republican governor and he might have vetoed something for 8 years, but for the most part, we've always had the power within the legislative body to do whatever the legislative leaders wanted to do. And if they didn't want to do something, it wasn't because Republicans said don't do it or could stop them from doing it. But what has been influential is we have a modicum, a minuscule amount of Democrats that are in purple districts that in primaries might have serious Republican challenge. And because the Democrats want to hold on to the power, the numbers, sheer numbers, they don't like to put those Democrats in situations where they have to take controversial votes that their Republican candidates, opponents could use against them in campaigns. Is there any validity to that? Well, the leaders would say, yeah, because their interest is to have the majority, and a solid majority, so they can do whatever the will of the majority of Democrats is. Jill Carter, me personally, not being a leader that has to be concerned with that as my number one priority, I say no. Because when they get there, the purple Democrats, 80% of the time, they vote against the stuff that we need anyway. So it doesn't matter if they're there versus a Republican. We don't have their vote a lot.
When you say that I have been different about President Biden until yesterday, now I have zero incentive to support him, is there a chance that you're opening the door for the return of Donald Trump?
So one of my good progressive friends texted me the same thing, and she said the same thing, and she's concerned. Maybe I'm just, disconnected or not understanding something. I don't think so, because I think Trump is indicted on multiple things, and he's going to most likely prison. So I don't see how he's going to have time to be the president, because I think he's got to deal with the justice system, and I don't see how he gets away from all these charges. No, I don't think Trump is going to be the next president. I think Biden's going to be the next president. And I think Biden's going to be the next president, whether I personally support him or not.
That confidence that you have that he is going to be president one way or the other, is that confidence leading you to be a little bit more strident in your rejection of him? So
we're talking about the primary and not the general. And I do believe there should be, healthy debate, robust debate, and choices in the Democratic primary. That's what I believe. if the fallout of that is that we can't be strong enough as a party at the end of the day to convince people to vote for us and not the lunatic on the other side, which in this case, in my opinion, by all accounts, Trump is a lunatic. I mean, he's just not even to me, he's not even a reasonable choice.
But Senator, he was not a reasonable choice in 2016 and he was elected, right? Here is a man who said, if I shot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue, nothing would happen, right? That's a crazy, unbelievably out of control statement. But he won. So we are in some ways, we are in an unprecedented time. Are you so convinced that the Democratic Party will prevail in the 2024 elections that this possibility doesn't occur to you?
Well, I think that, first of all, again, you're talking about the general. So, back then, I mean, you saw the way everybody united around Biden the last time in a kind of a really, really shocking way, in my opinion. But you're going to see unity within the party and a real fight to keep the Republicans out by Democrats and independents with our leanings. So I think that's not the issue with the primary.
The same thing could be said about 2016, and it didn't happen. It happened in 2020. You're right. But 2016 is exactly the opposite lesson, right? Because folks stayed away, Hillary lost.
I'm not encouraging anybody to stay away. Let me backtrack. You're an educator. You're a professor. And I know this isn't the subject, but it's related to the subject. And it's something that we won't solve in this one little conversation, but it's real. A part of the huge problem, the dynamic here, is how uneducated, undereducated, and woefully ignorant the mass American public is about politics. And because of that ignorance, people like Trump and others with nothing that they actually do backs up what they say, their rhetoric. But people don't look into that. So a larger conversation beyond the election is, it's our fault. It's our fault, the American people and American leadership and people that have any power to do anything about it, that we don't do a better job at educating children in school and adults about the political system. And I actually do believe that's intentional, because the more ignorant people are, the easier it is to people to control. We have to do a better job of educating people. And you might say, well, why are you saying this? Have you ever tried to do anything? Yeah. I put in legislation to mandate teaching politics in the schools. I think many, many years ago, a little teeny bill passed on a local level, and I'm told that it has never been implemented. So that's another thing. You can legislate, but whether they implement it, you don't always have the control over that. But I have made a decision, really, I'm not just saying this because I'm on your show. I've made a decision that with the time I have left in politics, and even after, that's what I'm going to dedicate myself to. Because let me tell you something. My experience and our collective experience would be much different and much better if the masses of people understood anything about what we do and about what the legislature does and what the political dynamics are. That's critically important for any real change.
Jill Carter, thank you for coming on I Hate Politics.
Thanks for having me.
Lines are drawn in yellow, black, and white. Turn your head and focus on the side of stories, bodies, faces, space, and air. Lines around each box lit in the light. Touch the screen and ask for more. Shadows cast the room in black and white.
You're listening to I Hate Politics. I am Sunil Dasgupta. Ordinarily, this is the time I would draw out lessons from my conversation with my guest. I don't think any lesson drawing on my part is necessary this week. Ordinarily as well, it would be standard practice to have gone to former Governor Martin O'Malley to ask for his comments. but we made an editorial decision not to reach out to him. The facts of Martin O'Malley's tenure as Baltimore mayor are well established. The practice of picking up black men, counting the arrest, and then letting them go without charges is well known. As to how Jill Carter felt in the context of this incredible political fight, which she has called political torture, it is really her story to tell. A part of what makes this episode compelling is that Jill Carter's voice is the one which was stifled, marginalized, and disconsidered. Her interview here on I Hate Politics then brings a much-needed spotlight to that experience, an experience that has not been afforded the attention it deserves. There is room for more policy discussion on the subject, but today's episode was not the time or the place to have such a discussion. That's all for this episode. You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. Music for this episode comes from Washington, D.C.'s post-punk rock band, Gray Swift. Mike Mangiaracina on guitar and vocals, Fabrizio Cariani on guitar and backing vocals, Evan Hurd on bass, and Chris Blackburn on drums. You can find Gray Swift on their Bandcamp page. The link is in the show notes. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you will subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.